Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger, and I realized last night at about 2:30 in the morning that I forgot to record a podcast yesterday. I mean, the podcast the day before about patience being a superpower in the modern age, that was a long one. That was almost an hour long. But yeah, yesterday I totally forgot. But I wish I had a better reason for forgetting to do the podcast yesterday, other than a traditionally distracted, geeky reason. But in that way, I think a lot of us can relate. We went on a side quest that took us away from the main mission, and now we're stuck. We don't even remember what the main mission was. So I don't know name any RPG. You go on you do all these side quests, and then you come back to the town to find out what the actual mission was. I don't remember where I was in the actual mission. That's what happened to me last night. Main mission was to make the daily podcast. The side quest was swapping the internals from one computer case to another computer case. In this podcast, I'll tell you a little bit more about that debacle in a second, but just a teaser. This podcast, I want to talk about a jet-powered drone. So we will talk about that. But first, my little geeky side quest here. I transferred the internals maybe a year and a half ago, from my main workstation PC into a home theater PC case from Silverstone. This is not a plug for Silverstone. They are kind of I don't want to say higher end computer case manufacturer, because it's not like the prices are outrageous or anything like that, but these computer cases are way better than the thin little aluminum foil $40 computer cases that you can get out of the bargain bin from newegg.com or whatever. So anyways, I was transferring it from one Silverstone case into my, I want to say it's a Corsair case. Is it called Carbide? It has soundproofing material in it, because, side note, I'm done with, well, maybe not done with, because saying done with is kind of a harsh concept, but I went through the phase of a glass siding for my computer case to look inside there and see all the guts and everything, and that's really cool, don't get me wrong. I will do other builds with that glass side panel. But if you recall from way long ago episodes of Geek Therapy Radio, my workstation is called Demon's Whisper, because it is very fast. At the time I built it in 2015, it's still what I'm using, Intel Core i7 4790K in a GTX 980. NVIDIA GTX 980 graphics card, I made the whole system to be silent. So it's completely solid state, at least for the main operating drives. It does have a couple of high storage traditional hard drives that go to sleep after a few minutes, so it's completely silent when I'm working, or it can be completely silent when I'm working. So I wanted to buy a case that was completely silent, or would aid in that silence, and fill it with Noctua fans in a gigantic Noctua cooler. So I want it to be silent. So my workstation case is just this black monolith slab of a brick of a computer case. I don't even plug in the LED headers, so the hard drive access LED or even the power LED. I don't want, for a workstation computer in that environment, I don't want it to be distracting at all. So there's no lights on it, and there is no water cooling in it currently. I might put some water cooling in it because water cooling isn't actually that loud. Anyways, it's optimized for silence. Silence and just blend in and don't stand out. That's for the workstation. Now, if I do another build for fun, sure, I've got a glass panel case in the closet that I probably do a build in there. I'm not such a huge fan of all the RGB in the world. I know that might be sacrilegious in this day and age, but yeah, I'll do a build with the glass panel so I can see inside. Maybe when I do my AMD build, I'll do that. We'll see. But getting back on track here, my little side quest, I was transferring out of my Silverstone HT PC case into my Corsair workstation case. And I thought, you know what? That's fine. My wife and I will just watch the remainder of Star Wars. I forgot how long Star Wars is, the original Star Wars. The first Star Wars that came out, it gets so confusing now, but the first Star Wars that came out, I forgot how long that was. She asked last night, did we finish Star Wars? Yeah, we're almost done with it. You fell asleep, but we're almost done. We were 48 minutes from the end. We started watching right before they got into the trash compactor. And there's a lot more movie left after that. So anyways, I thought, okay, the last 48 minutes of the movie, I'll just watch it and I'll bring my computer cases downstairs and I'll do the transfer while we watch Star Wars. That is a perfect geek evening. It took like 3 hours. These projects, when you're building computers, I'm sure I could have just did a speed run with transferring these computer guts, but I kept getting distracted by, Star Wars and other things. But it took me about 3 hours to transfer cases. And when I got all done with it, it was about 2:45 in the morning, 2:30, 2:45 in the morning. I brought the computer upstairs to my man cave recording studio arcade old retro computer museum room, plugged in the computer, and that son of a gun was idling at 90C, peaking up to 100C, peaking up to its thermal limit, its T-junction. It's like, what? And I know there's a lot of you out there who have built PCs, put PCs together, and you get it all buttoned up, and you've cut your fingers all up on the sharp edges of the sheet metal, and your back hurts from leaning over it, and your eyes are tired from squinting at a little flashlight on little tiny screws. It can be it's easy enough, but it can be frustrating, especially if you're air cooling with a massive heat sink, which is what, in my case, makes it so hard to get around. And anyways, I got it all buttoned up and turned the power on, and it's thermal throttling. I put new IC Diamond thermal paste on the CPU and the heatsink. Something came loose. It was not loose. It's not seated correctly. It was 2:30, like I said, almost 3 in the morning by that point. I said, screw it. I'm going to bed. At least I know the computer works. It powers on. Obviously, the graphics card is working because I can see something, and I'm plugged into the graphics card. Everything's working except for the heatsink is not seated on the CPU properly. Frustrating. So that's what took me off my main quest of recording the podcast last night. So let's get to that now. The last podcast, what did I say I was going to talk about? HDR. Right. I'll touch on that briefly because really, like I mentioned, I want to talk the meat and potatoes of this podcast about this jet-powered drone. You can't call it a quadcopter because it's not actually a copter. It's jets. So anyways, let's talk about HDR for a moment. HDR 10, whatever you want to call it. There's controversy that it is controversial, but at the same time, it's not surprising. A very popular show right now, needs no introduction, is called The Mandalorian on Disney+. As I'm watching the episodes of Mandalorian, you'll notice when on any modern TV, when you fire up a show like Mandalorian and you're watching it in 4K, Ultra HD, like everything, it's a modern a TV show that's come out in 2019, filmed with the best cameras ever and super high quality, rich content. In the corner of the screen, it'll say that it's detected that it's HDR. It's detected that it's 4K, so you're watching it at 2160p, what have you. And it turns out Mandalorian is not real HDR. Matter of fact, as I was watching it, I noticed, why is it so dim? Why is this show so dark? And I just chalked it up to the fact that, okay, if the show is HDR, my TV is not HDR compatible, to my knowledge. It displays that the content is HDR. My NVIDIA Shield TV will say that it's HDR content, but my actual Sony Vizio, to my knowledge, is not an HDR compatible TV. So I figured that's why it's dim. It's HDR content, my TV's not compatible, so it's just really dim. As it turns out, it's fake HDR. It's faux HDR. It was not filmed and processed in HDR. They put an HDR patch on it on the output, but it is not edited in true HDR. And before we break out the pitchforks for The Mandalorian, tons of TV shows and movies do this. Tons of them. I will not go over the full list because it is a staggering list, and it just brings me to this point. Yes, it's shady that content companies will hawk something as HDR because it's a buzzword in a marketing gimmick, but then that it's not true HDR. And how that's kind of dangerous and misleading because it makes people pay the extra premium for these HDR capable, TVs, and then they're not watching content in true HDR. It's deceiving, and not only is it deceiving, but you're literally not getting what you paid for, and it can trick your TV into making things look worse. I notice on my TV that the image processing struggles with dark areas. It's not just the codec and compression of streaming video, but the actual, the show says HDR, so there's stuff flickering, like there pixels and whole areas of the screen that are going light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. It's triggering the active LED array or whatever behind the screen. It's not set up properly. The TV is looking for and compensating for something that is not actually happening, and it just makes the experience worse. I will say, in The Mandalorian's defense, it looks gorgeous. Even the visually remastered, not necessarily talking about the CGI, but the Star Wars looks amazing. Even though it came out in 1977, I believe, in 4K, remastered, looks really, really good. The Mandalorian looks really, really good, but it just sucks knowing that it's not true HDR, that it is causing some sort of artifacting and fritzing out of the TV during certain scenes, and that the whole thing is just overall way too dark for the most part. It makes you think that there's something wrong with your TV. There's nothing wrong with your TV. It's saying that it's HDR. It's sending the HDR signal, and it's not true HDR. It was not mixed and edited in true HDR. So that kind of sucks. With that said, to end this point, that's been happening. This type of hype and deceit, especially when it comes to home theater and audiovisual content, has been happening forever, for a very long time. Back when Blu-ray was first a thing, you would buy a movie on Blu-ray, but what it turned out to be the case, you would buy it on Blu-ray because Blu-ray was high definition. It was 720, 1080, up to 4K for Blu-ray, even in modern days, 4K Blu-ray. But back when Blu-ray was first a thing for a long time, they would just take the DVD content, which was 480p at best, and upscale it. Upscale it to 1080, upscale it to 720. It's just an upscale filter. It wasn't truly remastered in 1080. It wasn't remastered in high definition. It was just artificially upscaled and burned onto a Blu-ray. So in that case, you weren't getting what you paid for. That's just one example. This type of marketing hype and these audiovisual gimmicks have been happening forever. It sucks. I hate this phrase, but it is what it is. To watch true HDR content, basically, since the consumer can't trust anything, it's up to the consumer to do their research on what is truly recorded and edited and mastered in HDR versus what just has an HDR mask thrown on it and sent out to your Netflix or sent out to your Disney Plus or what have you, your video streaming. It just sucks. It just sucks that that's a thing, but there's nothing new under the sun, especially in that universe. So let's just move on to this jet-powered drone, I should call it. And it's the aim for this thing is to be a delivery drone. So let's just talk about what it is and who created it. A Dallas-based company called FushionFlight. And it's a quadcopter type drone, except it uses jet engines, and it's called the AB5 Jet Quad. I guess Jet Quad makes the most sense because it is 4 jet engines on the 4 corners of this quad. So it has all the VTOL capabilities. VTOL means vertical takeoff and landing capabilities of a traditional quadcopter drone and different fighter aircraft. The thing is that since it's jet powered, it's diesel powered turbine engines, micro turbine engines that produce 200 horsepower. So 50 horsepower each engine for a total of 200 horsepower given it the full beans. And that's good for, in the production version, they have a prototype, but in the production version, it's supposed to get up to 300 miles an hour. Right now, it just does a little, 250 miles an hour or so. But the production version will do over 300 miles an hour. That's 483 kilometers an hour. And it has a 5-gallon or 19-liter fuel tank. And 5 gallons of this diesel jet turbine fuel is good for, they claim, 30 minutes of hovering and or 15 minutes of cruising. Now, here's my first, I'll go over the specs a little bit. We'll come back to that. The maximum, I'm from Minnesota. The maximum payload is 40 pounds. That is 18 kilograms for our international friends. And the drone itself weighs 50 pounds. So, and a full tank is another 40 pounds. So, okay, so we got 40 pounds of payload, 50-pound drone, and 40 pounds of fuel. That is, by my calculations, what is that? 130 pounds? Right? 40, 90, 100? Yeah, it's 130 pounds all in. Traveling at 300 miles an hour, that's a ballistic missile. That will do damage if it hits anything. So those are the specs. Those are the numbers on paper. Oh yeah, it's supposed to cost between $200,000 and $250,000 with future plans Future plans to add afterburners on the premium model. Oh, could you imagine the Amazon delivery drones being jet-powered, afterburner-powered drones? Dude, you would get toilet paper if you just ordered toilet paper off Amazon. You could order it on the pot and have it just like jetted through your window before you flushed. Like you could have it that fast with this jet-powered drone. So my one point of interest, and really I'm just bringing this up because it's interesting, it's cool. There isn't much cooler than a jet-powered drone. That's really cool to think about and talk about. My first point of contention, because it's kind of the first, I don't want to call it red flag that was raised in my mind, but it's the fuel efficiency aspect of it. Everybody, well, for those of you who don't know, jet engines guzzle fuel, but their efficiency isn't in their miles per gallon or anything. It's how much, it's that speed. It's that they can be propelled at that speed. So yes, while you're guzzling so much fuel, you are also going way, way further in distance. For the most part. And I'll use this example. So here, think about it like this. This drone can cruise for 15 minutes at 300 miles an hour. 15 minutes is 1/4 of 1 hour. So let's divide 300 miles per hour by 4, and that is the distance that it can travel in 15 minutes. So this drone can travel 75 miles in 15 minutes. A DJI Mavic, my DJI Mavic with no payload, because it's not a delivery drone or anything like that, in sport mode with no GPS guidance will max out at 40 miles per hour, a far cry from 300 miles per hour. So while that battery will last for 20-25 minutes, at 40 miles an hour, you can't even reach the 40 miles in an hour. You're reaching, I could probably fly to 15 miles. That's what the battery would last, about 15 miles, 40 miles an hour, thereabouts. It's way less than 75 miles. So yes, while this isn't as fuel efficient, diesel fuel has far, far, far greater energy density than even the best lithium polymer battery. So pound for pound, ounce for ounce, there is more stored energy in an ounce of diesel fuel than there is stored energy in 1 ounce of lithium polymer battery, even the best technology battery we have today. So yes, while you're burning 5 gallons of fuel, you are also going, 4 or 5 times further on that 5 gallons of fuel than you are with battery. So we can get into debates on how good it is for the environment, whatever, all this stuff, but the fact remains that you are getting a lot farther than a traditional drone for the same amount of flight time. That's what it all boils down to. Fuel efficiency aside, you are getting a lot farther with that 15 minutes of cruising than you get with 15 minutes of a typical consumer drone. And that just makes me think about future drone technology. Maybe it's not the best use case scenario to talk about desperately needing toilet paper within moments. I mean, that is an emergency for people, don't get me wrong. But we've made do for thousands of years without it. Modern man and woman, not to discriminate, has made do and adjusted to the fact that sometimes there's no toilet paper in the house when such an emergency arises, and you, well, we won't get into specifics, but we make do. But I like to think about bringing it back to drones, Amazon delivery drones, and fuel efficiency, just energy efficiency, period. Yes, when you need a product quickly, within a very quick amount of time, there's nothing that's going to beat a diesel-powered jet engine to cover that distance at that speed. But for most of the deliveries, you don't need it that fast, and it's far, far more energy efficient to deliver it at 40 miles an hour or so with a standard Amazon delivery drone. And on that note, delivery drones, if and when they become a thing, will travel much, much faster than 40 miles an hour. Mark my words. There will be little invisible lanes in the sky that these drones will be crisscrossing and flying through, designated areas in the sky that the GPS will lock to and fly through. But they'll be cruising close to, if not well over, 100 miles an hour. So an Amazon delivery drone, and there's already been prototypes for this. You can look it up. I might include a link in the description below for these prototype drones that, yes, they take off and land vertically, but they go into a different configuration when they're cruising. Like the rotors tilt forward like the Navy's and Marines Osprey aircraft kind of thing, to where, yes, it lifts up like a helicopter, but then the rotors tilt forward and it pulls itself through the air more like an airplane. To fly as the flow cries, fly as the crow flies, A to B, much quicker in a straight line. So that's all going to be done with electric motors. So that brings me to the main marketing point of this. What kind of application would a drone that guzzles fuel, can fly up to 30,000 feet, even though 15 minutes, like, I doubt you can get up to 30,000 feet in 15 minutes. I mean, you can, but how much fuel, you'd have to come right back down. It doesn't make any sense. Like, there's 5 gallons of fuel is not going to do much good at 30,000 feet if it could even get there in the first place. So anyways, how is this thing going to be marketed? Who is this thing for? How is this company, FushionFlight, possibly going to market this thing? Well, I would tend to think that a company like Amazon isn't going to have much use for a drone like this that can fly over 300 miles an hour, especially once they give it the friggin' thing afterburners. But you know who I do see as a market for this thing, if you haven't already guessed it? Hospitals. Hospitals. These will be, even at 200 grand, you know, if they sell enough, they'll come down in price, whatever. These will be cheaper all in, way cheaper actually, than a traditional helicopter. So let's say you need a heart transplant. You need to transplant a heart from a motorcycle crash victim from one side of town to the other side of town. Instead of firing up the helicopter and doing all that kind of stuff in a traditional helicopter, burning all that fuel in a traditional helicopter, calling the pilot off a standby and all that kind of good stuff, put that heart, while it's still warm basically, in this drone and shoot that thing across town at over 300 miles an hour to the recipient. That is one usage case. It's going to be this kind of, I see this marketed as kind of a niche usage case, and at $200,000 to $250,000 a pop, I think that's exactly what it's intended to be. This thing isn't going to be on sale to consumers. This thing isn't going to be made to transport your drunk Amazon purchase from its nearest, fulfillment. Why can't I talk today? Fulfillment center to your house. It's not because you're having a bathroom emergency and there's no toilet paper in the house. For life-saving operations, life-saving missions, critical missions like that, I think a drone like this will be an amazing replacement in a lot of cases for a $5 million helicopter. I don't know how much helicopters cost right off the top of my head, but I know that they are extremely expensive. Hospital helicopter, $250,000 is going to be a steal for a cost-conscious hospital, just in that kind of scenario. And you know what? I'll boil it down really simply. My personal takeaway from all this is I want one. You know what? I want one. What would I do with a drone that goes 300 miles an hour? Doesn't matter. What did my wife ask me last night? What is a... Oh, yeah. We were watching Star Wars. And I said, man, I want an X-Wing. And she goes, what would you do? If you had an X-Wing, what would you do with an X-Wing? And I was like, what are you talking? I would fly it to work. Where would you park it? She says, just in the last quarter half of the upstairs parking garage, just right on the roof of the parking garage there. That's not the motivation. It is completely not the motivation to think rationally what I would do with an X-Wing. How would the X-Wing would be practical? That's not the question here. And that's not the question with me wanting a drone that goes 300 miles an hour. Why do you want a drone what would you do with a drone fly it at 300 miles an hour? Because it's awesome. That's why. So I know that it's not rational for me to say, oh, I want a drone that flies 300 miles an hour. It's not rational for me to want an X-Wing fighter. It wasn't rational. Well, in a way it is, but kind of not. It's not rational to want a 1983 DeLorean. But the DeLorean does serve a practical purpose. It can get you from A to B. It can get you to where you need to go. It is a car, after all, at the end of the day. And even more practically, it appreciates in value. So that works out. Maybe it's not the best to compare an X-Wing to a DeLorean. First of all, the X-Wing doesn't exist. I tried to build it last night in, what's that game I always tell people to play? Why am I blanking out on it? Let me pull it up on my phone right here because I want to get the name right. Called Simple Planes. Oh yeah, Simple Planes. Simple Planes, I don't know how much it costs, but it's on Android and iOS, and it's just my favorite tablet game in the world. You can build all your own aircraft, and it's all based on physics and aerodynamics and everything. So if it won't work in the real world, it won't work in this game. So I tried to build an X-Wing, and if you can picture an X-Wing, and man, I'm going off on a geeky rabbit trail here, but if you picture an X-Wing, the aerodynamics of it can be destroyed theoretically from every angle because it's not really, well, actually then again it is. It's built to operate both in the vacuum of space and within atmosphere of planets. So either way, that's not counting that if it has some anti-gravitational type of thrust. Okay, let's just think about aerodynamically. Aerodynamically, an X-Wing fighter has its 4 wings in the back. Well, it's 2 wings that expand out to 4 wings, making it the X shape. But theoretically, all the lift in an atmosphere, if we're talking about traditional thrust and lift, all the lift is coming from the rear of the plane. So you need to figure out how to control the nose of the plane. You need some canards on the front of the aircraft to control the pitch of the airplane if all the lift is coming from the back and all the thrust in the X-Wing is coming from the back. So have the 2 jet engines on the back, the X-Wing configuration, 2 canards way up front, which the X-Wing does not have canards. So you got to think about these aerodynamics. And I did build one in Simple Planes, and it worked. Not as, well, in some ways better than expected, but it was a challenge to build an X-Wing in Simple Planes, but it was fun. I did it. My first try was actually the best. I started tinkering with it too much, and then it just became unflyable, and I just went to bed because I was done at that point. All right, so I think that's going to do it. Once again, apologies for not having a podcast yesterday, but I had one today, and it's good, and we geeked out, and we nerded out, and like I said, I still really enjoy doing these things, so embrace your inner geek. Remember, we're all geeks about something, so embrace your inner geek. Know that you are worthy of love, both giving and receiving love. Know that you're worthy of your own self-respect. And until tomorrow, hopefully, I'll see you next time. Take care.
Geek Therapy Radio, Saturday night at 10 on KPRC 950. Or listen anytime on our iHeartRadio app.